Welcome back to the No Gray Areas podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCullough. Well, in honor of Father's Day, we have a dad of 4, a mentor, a life coach, and a dear friend of mine, Tim Welch. Tim is on for a second interview covering how to raise resilient kids in modern society. Let's jump in. So, Tim Welch, welcome back to the No Gray Areas podcast. It's good to have you back here. Today, we want to talk about resiliency and how we parent our children toward resiliency and how we lead ourselves toward it. So before we get to talking about how we parent and how we lead ourselves to it, tell us, first of all, what is resiliency and why is it so important?
You know, if you go back and do some readings on resiliency, another word for that is grit.
Yeah.
And there have been plenty of studies out there that suggest that grit might be the number one thing that a young person possesses that brings them success and the ability to overcome things in life.
Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit, and that was her whole point in the book, right? Is they did a lot of studies with special forces and Division I athletes and professional athletes and people who do well in life, and they were trying to find out what is it about them? Is it their socioeconomic background? The parenting, and she goes, the one thing that was consistent was what you're just saying.
Absolutely, is grit, and like I said, another word for that would be resiliency. It should be a building block in every young person, and I honestly feel like as we move through generations, it becomes less of a building block. And sometimes I'm puzzled. Working in education for 35 years. That's my litmus test. That's my research is I watch it play out with families and kids and parents all the time. The same people, these awesome parents who are 45, 50 years old, who grew up in a time where they probably had resiliency built into them through their parents, are the same parents that are letting it get away from them and missing opportunities to grow this grit in their children.
Yeah.
And that will manifest itself in negative ways as they get older.
Yeah, and especially your point about grit on why it's important is you're saying there's been a lot of studies done, and it's not how smart you are, it's not what socioeconomic background you come from, it's not what school you went to. How you do in life is going to come a lot to resiliency and grit. And then if we're not developing that in our young people, or I'm going to keep bringing it back to this, in ourselves, because I'm 52. And I need to keep leading myself toward resiliency and grit. No one likes to be uncomfortable. No one likes pain. No one's like suffering. And that's the only time that we really actually get to see grit, right? I don't need to have grit and resiliency when things are going well. I need it when it's difficult. But so let me ask you this question. You brought up the point where you've watched in your 35 years in education that it seems like as the generations have gone on, you've seen a couple of generations go through then, that we're teaching that in our children less and less. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Overall, why do you think that is?
I've been thinking about that question. And I think there's no like one stamp like this is the reason. I think there are lots of reasons. First of all, I believe that we have redefined risk in the world and that we, maybe not even intentionally, but we do things as parents today that we've been instructed to do that actually remove risk from our kids' lives. You and I, growing up, rode through down the road, down hills, some difficult places in our bicycle, and never once had a helmet on. Mm-hmm. We're still here.
Yeah.
Right?
I do think I have some brain damage, though.
well, that might be true.
Yeah.
How many times?
You're right, though. You're right.
How many times in your lifetime when you were younger did you ride in the back of a pickup truck?
Many, many times.
Right.
Many times.
Think about all those things that we have created. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have helmets for kids and we shouldn't.
Yeah.
We should be letting them joyride in the back. What I'm saying is that the places that we'll let our kids wander into or participate in is very structured today. When I was growing up, 4 or 5 years old, on the end of my block, turned the corner, there was a swamp down there. My mom let us go down and me and my twin brother and play with the pollywogs and the frogs in the swamp all the time. Rarely today will a parent let their kid go anywhere outside of 2 or 3 houses. They
Mhm.
always wanna keep an eye on them. Again, good parenting, but things are more challenging today. Things are more dangerous today. I myself, even though I grew up that way with a lot of freedom, boundaries that I had to test, do you think I went down to that swamp and made some poor choices? Sure, I probably did. I waded too far into the water. I did certain things that I look back now, my mom probably, she was standing there, would have strangled me.
Yeah, yeah,
But that boundary testing, that's a pretty healthy thing to do. How can we help our kids? And this is kind of the first leg of resiliency. How can we let them test boundaries
yeah,
and experience risk in a safe way
yeah,
that challenges them to possibly fail,
yeah.
to, go for the varsity team, but only make the JV?
I want to come back to that because that's a key thing. When you and I were talking before we turned these mics on, we were talking about that idea of failure really goes hand in hand with resiliency. So I want to come back to that. But it's funny you bring that up about parenting because my mom was out visiting recently, and my sister and I were sitting there. I have a sister and a brother, but it was just my sister and I sitting there that day talking to her, telling her stories about what we did as kids, and she's like, "What? You did what? You did what?" So you're right. We were out there pushing boundaries. If there was a parent there, we wouldn't have done those things. And thankfully we survived. But you're saying it was there's an important part to that. I think about when you watch a little kid who's learning to walk for the first time, that's kind of to your point, isn't it? They are not gonna learn to walk without falling, without failing over and over again. But at that age, they don't even second they don't even take a second thought about it. It's just
Mm.
it's just purely natural for them to be willing to fail, willing to fall, willing to get hurt to learn how to do something like walking.
Right, and we do so many things as they grow up to eliminate failure,
Mhm.
or if there is failure, to quickly sweep it away and jump over and do something different. I just, I look at the school that I came from, 1,200 kids, very affluent area. Um, how many kids, when they struggled with the test, when they had an issue with the teacher, allowed their parent to come in and have that conversation?
Mhm.
Um, how many kids that struggled with playing time over something, a team, or whatever, and the parent came in and had the conversation. I have yet to this day have a conversation with a coach for my kids. In fact, this year, my son, who in his last year of college golf, there was an issue, and I honestly felt the coach should have come to bat for him a little bit more, and he didn't. But I didn't call the coach. I didn't call and say, "Hey, you really blew it here" or whatnot. I talked to my son and said, "What are you going to do about it? How are you gonna resolve this challenge?"
So why did you do it that way?
Because I'm a coach, first of
Yeah,
all,
yeah, you know what that's like as a coach.
and I've
So
spent a
yeah.
lot of time with kids in sports knowing that, hard moments develop great character, right?
Mhm.
Why would I steal this opportunity from him to be able to go in and address an adult type matter, even if it feels miserably, even if the outcome isn't what I want? At the end of the day, we put guardrails around our kids, and we structure and make decisions for them in such a way. Some of them don't even take risks unless we tell them they can take risks. There's something not natural about that, and it also steals a child's ability for me to dream about what could be.
Mhm.
Many of our kids don't dream today, as of what could be. Hey, what if I'm shooting for the moon, hoping I hit the stars? No, shoot for the stars. You're going to get the
You're
moon
gonna
on the
get
way
yeah,
by.
yeah, yeah. It's, with when we talk about resilience, I'm gonna ask you a question here that'll be a little controversial, but you just jump right into it. Do you think this youngest generation, this Gen Z, the one that well, I guess it's not the youngest generation, Gen Z is about 96, 97 to 2015. Do you think overall, not everyone, but is it a soft generation?
I first think that any generation after the previous one, the previous one thinks that you're soft,
Oh,
right?
I was gonna go there, but you went there. You're right. Every when we were young, that's all we heard from the generation before us, right? "You guys are soft. You don't understand what we had to do." Right? We think that way. But I'm setting you up here. Do you think they're soft?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Let it be known that, Tim Welch said that and
And
not Pat McCullough.
if you look at my parents' generation, I think we were soft.
Mhm.
I just think, if you look in the United States, the level of comfort that exists from one year to the next, it just increases
Almost never been a culture, society on
backwards.
this planet that has had the comfort levels that we've had.
Right, and we never go backwards. Once we hit this new territory of comfort that we never retreat, we never go back. We always keep
Yeah, we keep
advancing
progressing and advancing.
to
Yeah,
comfort.
yeah, yeah,
So there is that one piece of that they're comfortable. We haven't really opened the door for them to take some really positive risks. We limit things, but there's another avenue, and that's accountability. Accountability for poor decisions, for what happens when you fail, what happens if you don't like that, what happens if that hurts. There's a level of accountability that I want my all my kids to learn because they're going to be out in the real world. I want them to be able to make decisions under pressure, um, when
yeah,
things don't go their way. It's okay if you don't win the gold medal every
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. And again, let me pull this out because some of our listeners, that maybe they're not parents or they're past these days, but this applies to how we lead ourselves too. As you're talking here, I'm thinking to myself, Tim, all of this stuff applies to me still. Again, I'm 52 years old, and I still have to remind myself when I start going through a time that's difficult, that I'm suffering. I have to remind myself that this is good. This is where I grow. I don't grow in or easy times. I don't grow when things are going well. So I have to always remind myself, okay, what am I going to learn out of this? So we never, I don't think we're ever as human beings going to arrive at the point where we have this grit, this tenacity, this resiliency down. So this is a great conversation for all of us. But I love what you're also going to is how do we help the younger people get this? How do we help them understand that? And one of the things you're talking about is we got to let them fail. They're not always going to win the gold medal. So speak into that some.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to building grit, and we don't have to program it. We don't have to send them to a sport. What we can do is just do it kind of every day around our kids. We need to, I think, be really more dialed in on what guardrails are best for your kids, and where can you allow them to wander a little bit with some creativity, with taking a risk,
Gosh, I love that.
trying new things. But I want to circle back, and I'll come back to that. I want to circle back to how you started that, and that is it applies to me. If you want your kid to take positive risks, to be out there on the edge, maybe running for student body president or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
trying for the first chair, in the musical. Um, what as a parent are you doing? Are you challenging yourself? Are you, um, are you going after that promotion at work? Are you doing things that demonstrate, or are you playing it safe? Let me also jump onto another place that where I think resiliency comes from. You know that I'm a follower of Christ.
Hmm.
I've been doing kind of a deep dive study recently on the beatitudes,
Hmm.
and I look at the beatitudes, and
Which
I
for our listeners, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, but really the early part of Matthew 5. Yep.
right, and I look at those, and I think I can't do those. Tho- what Jesus is offering is this: if you'll embrace these, there will be a life that flourishes that comes
Yeah,
from that,
yeah.
right? And we all want a life that flourishes. As a believer, most of the things in there are so countercultural
Yeah,
that if
they
I
are.
decide to
Yes, they
step
are.
into them
Yeah.
and to grow and to learn and to embody those for myself and my family, it's gonna rub somebody the wrong ways. I'm gonna be taking risks. I might be having a conversation. I might be living something out that way, and somebody's gonna push back on that.
Mhm.
Or I'm gonna recognize that that's not I don't want to participate with that. That's
Yeah,
out of
yeah,
alignment with some of the things that the values that I believe.
yeah.
If I just like closed up the tent and said, that's too hard. I'm I'm gonna let those sit on the table and just kinda like, those are nice things, but I'm not gonna dabble with those.
We'd miss out on so much,
Oh,
wouldn't
w
we?
we would you and I could have
Yeah.
another hour-long
Yeah, we
discussion,
could.
all the things that we would miss out if we
Yeah.
decided not to pursue
Yeah.
those things,
But
right?
each of those is hard, right? Like, you go down that list of the beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. It's hard to be a peacemaker. It takes grit and tenacity and resilience to be a peacemaker, right? To yeah, and everything in that list. And then when you get to the end of the list, right, it talks about blessed are those who suffer.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Back it up. Let's say you're not that's not, you're not a believer, you're not
Mhm.
a follower of Christ. Um, I would just tell you that doing hard things, introducing hard things into your life would be really healthy for you.
Yeah.
And your kids can watch what it's like to struggle through something. But hopefully you're an adult and you can fail, reset the goal, get going again, fail, reset the goal, keep going. How many times have you heard that the most successful people out there are the ones who have failed the most?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I want my kid to have that.
Yeah. But that's something it's like a lot of leadership mantras. It's easy to say, but it's really hard to live out, that the most successful people are the ones who failed the most. That looks great on a poster on a wall, but if you're actually if you're living in that and it's like, "Oh, man, I failed again," that's really uncomfortable. And I think going back to, earlier when we were talking about why don't we allow our kids to do that, or especially as generations have gone on, it feels like there's more and more parents that are really protecting. Part of that is probably it's hard to I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent. It's hard to watch your kids suffer. Right? That's right. To me, that's one of the most difficult things in life is when I've watched my kids suffer when they were little. I can remember when one of my sons tripped and fell and cut his lip open on a railroad tie, and he was like 5 years old or whatever. And then we take him to the emergency room, and we're in there, and the doctor's like, "Okay, to stitch this up, the lip line, I have to stitch this perfectly to make that lip line match up. I need you to hold his head." So I'm holding his head and he's sobbing and he's going, "Daddy, why are you hurting me?" And I remember just tearing my heart out hearing him say that. But so that's what it's when you watch your kids suffer and then when they become adults and they suffer, it's not easy. It's like watching a 5-year-old look at you and saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" That's part of the reason why it's tempting as parents to step in all the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. It takes a lot of self-control not to,
Yes.
right? Because deep down in our hearts, it's difficult for us to go pursue something hard, or when we think,
Mhm.
there's a good chance there's failure there. I think I'm going to jump over that and go this way. So us ourselves aren't really adamant these days about jumping into the possible chance of failing. You
Absolutely.
think that we're going to allow our kids to do
Yeah.
that when
Yeah.
we already struggle, not letting them
Yeah.
not suffer?
Yeah.
A little practical. Let me tell you a practical story. Um, I was that parent, and some people probably look at me now and go, "You're a horrible parent." But when my kids fell off the bike, when my kids cut themselves, when we didn't make a big deal about it. We didn't call 911. I can tell you 5 or 6 stories where I watch my kid wipe out,
Yeah.
and I just sit there
Yeah. Yeah.
and watch.
You're okay.
And what do? They get up, they look and see who's watching. It starts with and then they realize nobody's watching, and it's like, okay, rub them
Okay.
off and get back on the bike.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was normal for my kids. So let's move forward a couple of years. Kobe um, is at a golf tournament, and I won't go through all the details, but he gets hit with a golf ball in the lip, and it just
Ooh.
just opens it right
Yeah.
up, blood everywhere. And I was standing on top of this porch, looking down on the putting green where this was all happening, and I saw it happen, and I saw him do this, and he looks around, doesn't see me. And then eventually I called him. I said, "I bet that hurt, didn't it?" He goes, "One of the reasons." I said, "Well, let's go get cleaned up." Right. Meanwhile, every kid around him is screaming their head off. Why I tell that story? Because at that moment, my son was looking for a solution to a problem that he had. One he didn't create, one that happened to him. He knew I could help him. We could work on together. So we went in the bathroom, eventually got it to stop and everything. And it was, pretty painful for him. So We left immediately to the urgent care and got it sewn up. And everybody at this golf tournament was assuming we would not be back tomorrow.
Mhm.
But my son, I woke him up in the morning and said, "Are we going or are we not going? You get to decide this." He, "Well, we're going. We're going."
Mhm.
Setbacks like that eh, have never been a challenge for my kids
Mhm.
because the goal and working towards it was a higher priority than, "Oh, this is a setback. I expect setbacks. Life will give me setbacks." Where did that come about?
Yeah.
Because I was just really intentional about letting things play out, letting my kids stay in the moment of a difficult situation, whether it was a poor decision, whether it was failure,
Yeah.
and just let them sit there and problem solve.
Let's unpack that staying in the moment in a second. I think that though, I'm going to come back to staying in the moment, but I want to just conclude what you're saying here in the sense that I think a lot of times as parents, we think our job is to protect our children.
Mhm.
And it is, but you're saying, but don't miss the point that while you're protecting your children, you also have to take some of that protection off because your job also is to teach your kid resiliency. And if all you do is protect them, they're never going to learn resiliency. Does that sum up really?
Absolutely. And that's a fine line, and every parent has to decide
Yeah,
which
yeah.
side of that
And it
line.
might be different for you may have, you got a couple of kids and what you do with one may be slightly different than the other one just because of personality difference. So I think it's great that you're bringing that up. You got to really think through that.
Yeah, you do. And you as a parent, you have to kind of measure it. Let me give you an example. I do some mission trips with kids, and sometimes parents won't let their kids go on a mission trip because you could get sick.
Mhm.
There's government unrest in the country. There's risk with any time you leave the United States, um, and they decide that the risk outweighs the potential gain, and we're always going to do that. Um, I have probably erred more on the side of, let's go for this. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to keep my eyes out. And at any point, if I feel like this is not safe for you, we might have a different discussion. Not, no, you can't do it. We might have a different discussion because I want my kid part of this conversation. I want them to, if I kind of felt uneasy about it, but my kid was says, "Dad, I get that it might be unsafe, but here's the benefits for it," and he's all in. Yeah, I probably might let them go.
Yeah.
And then who has to deal with that? I do. My kid's not worried about
You're right.
disease
You're
and
so
things like
right.
that
You're
on a
so right.
trip. He's having the
Yeah.
time of his
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
He's growing.
Mhm.
I'm at home,
Mhm.
white knuckling it, just like super
Mhm.
nervous.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm willing to take that burden on for you to have an opportunity to
Yeah.
grow.
Here's a silly example of what you're saying. I was just talking to, our kid because our kids now are parents of young kids, and so, we just had our 7th grandkid born a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. But I was telling them, I said, "Someday when your kids start driving, you're gonna find out when you hear sirens, it's different now. Like, you're sitting in your house, and you remember this as a parent, right? You hear some sirens go off. Right now, there's a police or an ambulance siren go, and right now it's just background noise. When your kid starts driving and they're supposed to be home at around 9 and it's 8:50 and you hear sirens, you're immediately going, "Uh-oh, is that them? Could that be them?" But you're not gonna say, "I'm never gonna let you drive because I don't wanna deal with those feelings." You gotta that's what you're saying as a parent, you have to deal with some of these fears and concerns that you have and let your kids go out and do some things that might be a little dangerous or they may fail at. So let's go back to what you said before where you said, "Let them stay in it for a little bit." That's an interesting concept. And again, I want our audience to take this to ourselves too. For me as a 52-year-old now, when I'm going through a difficult time, you're saying stay, don't try to get out, just don't do everything you can to get out of it. Or with your kids as you're parenting them, let them stay in it for a moment. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, what I would say is an adult, don't quit. Don't quit. Take a step back, survey, re-engage. But as far as is staying in the moment, let me give you two scenarios.
Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode so far. Be sure to like and subscribe to not miss a future podcast. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
As far as is staying in the moment, let me give you two scenarios. Your kid's trying out for the varsity basketball team, makes JV. He wants to quit, right? He probably gets teased a little bit by some of the kids who made varsity. Maybe he's there because puberty is just a little bit late for him, and some of the other kids have grown bigger,
Mhm.
stronger, taller, right? There's circumstances maybe beyond his control, and he wants to quit because it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
No, no, we're not going to quit. Because you and I both know whether he's on varsity or JV, there's an opportunity for him to grow his game. And if he's going to pursue this dream of being on varsity the next year, he has to stay right there. I can't tell you how many kids I've run across, and I'd never coached basketball, but who I've known at my school, and they didn't make varsity, and I found out they quit. And I said, "What'd you quit for?" You know what? I'm gonna go work in the weight room and get a strength and conditioning guy. I'm gonna do it, and then I'm gonna retry out. What?
Mhm. Mhm.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
Who gave you that advice? That is very poor advice, right? You need to stay there in that moment. And yes, you're probably going to get teased 3 or 4 times throughout the year. You're probably going to play your JV game and then sit in the bleachers and watch all these buddies of yours play in the varsity. That is not fun. But guess what? It develops character because I made him stay in the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Here's
absolutely.
another example. So I was a dean of students for the last 8 years at the school I was at, dealt with kids who made poor decisions at times. And let's say a kid gets caught, drinking at the football game. So we have this parent meeting, and the parent wants to really quickly check the box, like, "Oh, that was a bad mistake. What do you? Let's just suspend him for a day, and then they'll be back, and we'll forget this ever happened, right?" Well, that wasn't what our school did. We had a process where the kid would have to go through what we called a green pastures meeting, and then had to be mentored and do some education. In other words, this was a 7, 8, 10-week process that we made the kids stay in this moment. And it drove some parents crazy. Like, let's just check the box and
Just
move
move on.
on.
Just move on. Yeah, yeah.
No, there's an opportunity to grow character. And is this kid uncomfortable that he got caught? Well, sure, very uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable for him. It's like, well, that wasn't a wise decision, but there was a reason why you came to that precipice of that decision and decided to go A instead of B,
Yeah.
to bring the alcohol in and drink it as opposed to not do that. Um, it took you a while to get to that place. Why do I want to steal the moment of you kind of ruminating in that for a little while? Gosh, I don't like this. I feel uncomfortable. Now you're making me be accountable. You're even making me talk to an adult and be mentored about the poor decision that I made. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I want you to think about how I got there.
You know, this ties together some, as you know, as an educator, whatever it was back in the 20s or 30s when John Dewey and whoever else it was, they had that big debate, remember, about what's the purpose of education. Unfortunately, most of the educating world moved toward they were arguing about, is it to prepare people for life or to prepare people for a job? Radically different philosophy on how you're going to do it. And most schools followed the path over the last 70, 80, 90 years or whatever of we're going to prepare them for a job. But preparing them for life, you end up doing what you guys did as a dean of students. That wasn't just to get them back on the field or back on the basketball court when they made that mistake. You're holding them in that moment for a while because you're preparing them for life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what the difference in a coach that thinks like, we're just trying to get our win-loss, we want to have more wins than losses. Well, there's nothing wrong with thinking that way. I've worked with some coaches that didn't seem to care much about losing, and I couldn't stand working with them. But to understand that there's a higher call, though, of preparing them for life. And again, as men of faith, we both believe that God said his number one goal for you and me is to make us more like Jesus. So when we go through difficult times, sometimes we're going, why are you doing this to me, God? Why won't you get me out of this, God? Well, it's kind of the same thing where he's going, if you stay in that, I know it's uncomfortable for me. And I know it's going to make you more like Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. Let me paint a picture along what you just said. I run across lots of kids, and the school I was at was a faith-based school, so we had a lot of conversations about faith. And ironically, I ran a lot across a lot of kids who something tough happened. Grandpa died, mom and dad got divorced, whatever the life circumstances was, and 80% of them would say that really hurt my faith. It made me pull back. And as I dig a little deeper, well, why is that? What was it about? What about that are you blaming God for? And well, he could have done something. He could have intervened. He could have done X, Y, Z. and then you talk them through,
Mm-hmm.
um, how God can do things that we can't even think or imagine with every situation.
Mm-hmm.
And all I know is that my ways are not his ways, and I have yet to follow his ways and be disappointed. So let's pull that back. And now
Absolutely.
let's put this same argument in. There are also people in the Bible that God allowed to fail, to do something stupid, to make a mistake, to let their pride get in the way. He also didn't stop that. Not only did he not stop somebody from passing away, he didn't stop people from making a very poor decision.
Yeah.
And then he used that moment to grow them, to stretch them, to
Yeah.
take them to the next level
Yeah.
of what he had for them.
Well, that was masterful how you tied that into the theme of this podcast, which is the power and complexity of human choice, that we make our choices and our choices eventually make us. Because God does allow us to make choices, good or bad, but then he walks with us through those choices. And that's what you're saying. Then we should parent like God parents us in a sense. Like
Even when he knows we're going to fail,
yeah,
even when he knows the outcome is going to be painful for
yeah,
us.
yeah, and painful sometimes for generations, right?
Yes.
Like when we see plenty of stories in the Bible and then throughout history of generational pain that our choices sometimes make. One of the other things that you brought up when we were talking the other day is the danger of asking why. That don't ask why. I think this is a really important one to unpack. Now, again, for our own personal lives, I want our audience to what Tim's going to explain here about why we shouldn't ask our kids why when they go through a difficult or something. Take that to heart about even leading yourself, because I think it's natural. This is what you hear parents do it all the time, don't you? Something happens and you go, "Why did you do that?" And you're saying that's a dangerous question. So tell us why.
So if I ask why, I'm most of the time putting my kid on the defense, and I'm asking them to come up with an answer that maybe doesn't exist. How many times have you watched your kid do something that was brainless anyways? It involved no thought whatsoever. They reacted on an emotion, on spur of the moment, just jump in and see what happens. I have a son that does that still to this day, and he's a little bit older than a
Yeah.
teenager. Um, and asking him why, he doesn't know the answer to that question. He just did it.
Yeah. If he knew the answer, he probably wouldn't have done it.
Right. So asking why often will require him or her to either fabricate the answer or get really defensive. Now, if they're in that mindset, they're not in any position to learn from the poor choice that they just made or the mistake that they just jumped into. To me, it's better to say, to summarize, from my perspective, it looks like you've done this X, Y, Z. I got that right? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix that? It automatically starts creating this, have you ever seen, two kind of diodes together? I may not be using the right term, and electricity is kind of jumping across,
Yep,
right?
Yep.
That's what you want to create in them. And immediately, mistake, jump across to a possible solution.
What am I going to do about it?
So now I'm teaching my child, not what excuse can I come up with? What would make this sound? Because every time a kid tells why they did something, it always minimizes their responsibility. So why even put that on the table? Let's just talk about how are you going to solve that? What do you think you need to do? How would you resolve that issue? And now you can begin this dialogue. Well, I don't know. What would you do? Eventually, you hope they say that. What would you do that? Now, by the way, I wouldn't give them the answer in any way, shape, or form. Anytime my kid asks what I would do, I have trained myself to ask another question, because ultimately I want them asking the questions in their head to solve this problem that they have created, or sometimes life just puked on them and said, there's your problem.
Yeah.
There's your situation. Somebody, is maybe driving under the influence and hit your car. Not your fault. You didn't see it coming. You didn't plan on it. Wasn't in your schedule that day. But now you have to problem solve what to do. I want my kid jumping from problem to solution as quickly as they can.
So even if they came back and asked, well, what would you do? You're saying you wouldn't answer necessarily because you want them to think through it.
I do want them
Yeah,
to think
yeah,
through
yeah.
it. Now, I might have to throw them a couple of
Yeah,
bones a
yeah,
little bit,
yeah.
like, well, let me think. I know Jimmy is, super sensitive about these things. What would you do if you were like really oversensitive about something?
Yeah,
What would you expect to have
yeah.
happen? Again, you're just trying to get them, and you start this early. When they're 6, 7, 8. I'm not going to ask them to solve complex physics problems here,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
whose toy is it, and what would be the fair thing to do, and those type of things. But you're setting the door up for eventually. You don't have to say what would you do. They are, Dad, I messed up with this, I made this stupid decision. They're already going to start giving you a little bit of tidbits like, but I think how we can fix this, or I think what I need to do is go over and apologize, or whatever. That you're bridging to the solution. What a great way to send your kids off into life.
Oh, this is why I love this so much because that's a huge part of being a healthy adult.
Mm.
One of my favorite books about leadership is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. He was a former Navy SEAL. And his whole point of extreme ownership is he's going, listen, you have to own everything in your life. You own every choice. You own every decision that you've made. I mean, this is what a healthy person, healthy adult, this is what a healthy leader does, is they own that. But that's what you're saying. You start teaching that when they're younger by having them. Because again, we know, I know adults. I sometimes still do it. Make a mistake, and what do? I go start making excuses. Well, she said she made me mad, or she didn't say what I needed to hear that day. And I start making excuses instead of going, okay, I said something to my wife, shouldn't have said. It wasn't good. What am I going to do about it? So that's what a healthy person does.
Oh, sure.
But you're talking about helping kids learn that.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I don't have very many talents and strengths, but one of them is I don't crumble when things go bad. Um, immediately start asking the question, okay, well, that didn't work. Um, how can we, and I start processing possible solutions where everybody around me is like melting down. Oh my gosh, this is a complete failure. What are we going to do? That brings no clarity, no, you know, that doesn't inspire anybody to go any direction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Somewhere along the line, and I can't tell you who it was, maybe it was a conglomeration of people, but whatever my family did and whoever I hung around with gave me that mindset that I'm working to solutions, because it may look like it's a failure right now. That's not a failure. That's just a little indication that I'm quite haven't hit the mark, and I need to kind of reset or recalibrate or introduce something new that I haven't thought of yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's do you want your kid living life with that mindset? Yes, times 100,000.
Absolutely. One of the other things you talked about was not talking in catastrophic terms. That's another thing that we can do that's unhealthy in training children or young people toward resiliency. So unpack that a little bit. What do you mean when you talk about talking catastrophic terms?
Well, I'll approach it from two ways. Number one, um, if if you see a situation with your child happen and it's not good, and you come in with this catastrophic perspective, like, and I think with one of the examples that I shared with you is like, you really need to know how to swim, because if you drowned, that's going to have a really negative impact on me and my family. That's an example, right? Or
Yeah, yeah.
you might come in and catastrophize like, oh my gosh, you have completely blown it. What an incredible mess you've made of this, right? What you're really doing is internalizing a bad situation that you don't need to internalize. Why did you take ownership of that? Why did you make it about you so quickly? So that's the first thing. People who have these catastrophic perspectives on something that happened. Um, the first thing you're telling your child is there's no coming back from this when you have that catastrophic perspective,
Boy, that's a great point.
right?
Because that's the last thing they need to hear in that moment is
Right.
that there's no coming back from this. And it's certainly not going to teach them resiliency.
True. Now, if you're wrong, well, let's say That's what you believe. This is catastrophic. This is okay. What you're going to do is believe in your head there is no solution as a parent, and you're going to back them away from that. Like, okay, let's just back away from it. Let's try to minimize that it really ever really happened. Please don't do that again, right? Um, or a solution will come its way, and you will work through it. In which case, you're now losing your credibility with your kid. And every single time that you want to be catastrophic, eventually they're going to tune you out.
Mm.
That what you want? Really? Um, I just really think as a parent, when it comes to building resiliency in kids, assume that there is a way to overcome whatever this mess is.
And there almost always is in reality,
There
right? There
almost always is.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And again, that's why this is such a great conversation because, again, it goes to our lives as we lead, because we're talking today about resiliency, but how do you train that in the children? But how do you lead yourself into resiliency? And again, that's so good for us to hear, even as adults. That's what we do internally, that internal voice. Again, the way we talk to ourselves, most of the time we would never think of talking to other people that way. And yet internally we talk to ourselves. And we do that often with ourselves, where we do something, we're like, oh man, I'm never going to come back for this, or there goes that job, or, we immediately go to that instead of going, okay, made a mistake. What am I going to do about it?
The other thing that I want to caution people, there's a go between, so one level lower than catastrophic response is that you come in immediately and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the solution. You just, again, robbed your child of an opportunity to probably fully take responsibility and accountability for the mistake, and two, resolve in their mind, you know what? I'll own this, but there's a way out. There's a way to overcome this. There's a comeback that can be made in the midst of a situation that seems dire. Your kid comes home from school and I'm being picked on, I'm being bullied, I'm being whatever. Okay, if this is the 7th or 8th time, maybe it's time to have a conversation with the school. But in the beginning, I want to say, well, okay, tell me the situation. How did it come about? Do you think you said anything? You think you did anything? I mean, let's first look at ourselves. Okay. Well, how might you avoid that situation in the future, or how might you resolve it? Um, this dialogue should be happening at home. Next day they come home. And by the way, this is something a parent, I'm kind of sliding in the back door here. After you have resolved a conflict in a situation, you should revisit it down the road, because it tells your child that I think that's as important as you thought it was as important. So it could be, they come home, my good friend, we had a blow up today. We're not friends anymore. Blah 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 blah. Let's go through the whole gamut. Okay. Oh, they weren't a good friend anyways. Cast them off. You don't want to certainly go. That's that catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
What you want to say is, well, how did it get that way? Okay. And you keep asking questions and you're helping them process. How many times have you had a conversation when you're trying to solve a church issue or a family issue, and you're all just kind of bouncing back and forth, right? And through talking and listening and processing, and even maybe half the things you say don't make sense, but it just allows you to get it out there on the table. You say anything, and you're thinking, oh, no, that's not a good solution. Okay?
Yep.
Right? Help your kid find the solution to a kid problem. Don't give them an adult solution to a kid problem.
Yeah.
You think you're going to teach your kid, and this is kind of a funny, way out of bounds. You're going to help them to form a PowerPoint that they can go back to school with and show Billy why bullying isn't safe and everything. Yeah. Probably not.
No.
But sometimes our solutions are like that.
You're right. You're right. Yeah. How's that going to help a 6-year-old?
No.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
And if you help walk them through, you're giving your kid an opportunity to develop courage.
Yeah.
Which is a component of grit.
Yes. And philosophers and theologians, by the way, for over 2,000 years have talked about courage being one of the most important character qualities, that almost all other character qualities come from that. Just like we were saying at the beginning of this podcast, grit is considered, or resiliency is considered one of the most important character qualities. Philosophers and theologians have been saying that forever. You think of even the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You live any of those out, it will take courage, grit, resiliency. So this is why this is such an important conversation. You talked about another thing when we were visiting about this managing emotions, which again, helping children learn this, but as adults, continuing to lead ourselves in managing emotions. Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Anytime there's pain inflicted or a difficult situation, it's super easy for us to let our emotions bubble up. And you have met all kind of different people
Mhm.
who, when something either strikes them in a negative way, they escalate real quick. And then some people who just kind of,
Mhm.
I didn't particularly like that, right?
Mhm.
So our kids, 2, 4 years old, full of emotions. Most of Jimmy takes the toy away from them.
Yep,
Wah,
yep. Yeah,
they cry. It's an emotional response.
yeah.
You're raising them to be less in emotion and more on problem solving.
Mhm.
I think you should validate their feelings.
Mhm.
Okay. Susie comes home. She's had a bad fight with her best friend and she's super sad. She's upset. She's angry. It's okay to validate those. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, I can see why you're angry. Yeah. Possibly if that happened to me, I might be angry as well. But we're always circling back to what do you want to do about that?
Mhm.
In other words, feel the emotion. And sometimes we can't help. It is so egregious to us, we feel that emotion. But let's get in the habit of practicing ourselves as well as helping our children practice that, deal with the emotion and then move to a solution. And by the way, if you want your child to do this and you're not doing this and you tend to escalate things and become emotion right away, again, you lose your credibility as a parent.
More is caught than taught.
Yeah,
Like you can say all you want about managing your emotions, but if you're not as a parent, they're going to catch that and live that out far more than your words that you're speaking to them. Man, this is such a great point again, Tim, because emotions are real, and again, we've all been around people whose lives are driven by their emotions, and they're oftentimes not very fun people to be around, especially when things aren't going well. Um, so training ourselves that, and what I like what you said, the emotion's real though. I mean, I've gotten better in just the last few years of asking myself and like staying in that moment a little longer, going, okay, why did I get so angry about that? Like, what's going on? Why did I get that? But always moving, and this is what you're saying, right? Always moving it though toward validate it, but then move it toward what are we going to do about it? That's what this goes so well with again, our whole core of this is about the power and complexity of human choice, that God has given us a choice. I can't blame my decision on my emotion or how I grew up or what so and so did or said to me, that eventually it's going to be, what am I going to do about it? My choice.
Yeah, if you had, let's say you had a bowl of water and the problem was inside the water, and take something and you shake it up a little bit, almost quickly because it's clear water, you're going to be able to see the problem again, right?
Mhm.
So agitating it in that setting. But if you were to pour a few drops, and those drops are emotions, and you agitate it a little bit, now you can't see the problem clearly anymore,
It's the
right?
emotions are all, man, that's such a great word picture there.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like this dust. You're putting this explosion in the middle of a hard situation,
Yeah.
um, and and I'm not saying that every single problem has a solution. Sometimes it is such a mess that it's best to just back away
Mhm.
and reevaluate.
Mhm.
Like, is this really a road that I need to go down? And again,
But we could argue that's still a solution.
oh,
That still is, yeah,
absolutely.
you're right, you're right. You're still saying, "Okay, what I'm gonna choose to do in this situation is," yeah.
I just we all are emotional, and there's certain things that could happen here today that would just pique you emotionally, and I'm just going, what's the big deal? And vice versa, right? What is true at that very moment, I'm in a better situation to handle or deal with that problem than you are, because you have to let that emotion kind of drain off a little bit. And emotion's good.
Yeah, yeah,
Emotion is
yeah.
really
They're
good.
God-given. Yeah.
If think about some of the really exciting times in your life.
Mhm.
If you've ever had, you know, my son Kobe winning a college golf tournament, man, I am like on cloud nine. I am
Mhm.
super excited. If that didn't mean anything to me,
Uh-huh.
wouldn't life feel blah?
Yeah. Yeah, it would.
Motion is good.
Yeah.
But when it comes to how we channel it, how we use it, let's validate it, but then let's use
Mhm.
that emotion to move on.
Yeah. Anything else you would say about this subject, Tim? Is there anything we missed? I know we could probably spend hours talking about this, and I think it's such a critical topic. But is there anything that you want to add that again, as we train up young people and as we lead ourselves toward resiliency, what are things that we may be missing or that we need to do?
So, you and I chatted real quick last couple of days about, why is it that parents are not maybe doing this very well today? And these are the same parents who life and circumstances and the way they were raised back when they were younger built in resiliency and grit. And now we're quick to run and to save and to protect in a way that loses those opportunities. I thought about 12 or 13 things that I would dive deep into on why I think that's the case. But one of them to me rises to the top. And not every parent does this, but we live in a very upward mobile society. We're very busy. There are more two parents working than one than ever before, right? Part of the reason we struggle with just letting our kids stay in the moment is because we really don't have time for them.
As we're wrapping up this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment on something you'll take away. All right, let's hop back into the remainder of the episode.
Part of the reason we struggle with just letting our kids stay in the moment is because we really don't have time for them. If we were really honest with ourselves, your job, your responsibilities, it used to be back in the day. Um, and I'm not advocating that this is exactly how everybody should do it, but there was usually one parent working, one parent at home. One parent always had their eye kind of on the circumstances. Always when you spend time and proximity around your little ones, you know them
Mhm.
versus when you have maybe just 2 hours with them versus 8 hours. Your ability to engage, if there are two working parents, it just isn't, you don't have the time in the day, right? And I think at the end of the day, that probably really hurts us. We like this rhythm of life to happen in our family where everybody's happy, everybody's thriving, everybody's doing great. And then one person in the family, makes a mistake or a poor choice or, gets sick or whatever, something that causes now this forward motion of our family to go, wait a minute, we have an anchor now. Our kid got caught drinking at school. Our kid, XYZ, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And instead of just like, okay, as a family, we're going to stop for a minute. Let's check this out. Let's do all the things that we've been talking about. In our minds, we're thinking, we don't have time to do this. I have a presentation at work tomorrow. I have this. Your dad's traveling tomorrow. All these things that these responsibilities that we have put on us to bring value into our life.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, my experience with the kids that I dealt with that made poor choices is their parents really, for the most part, not every parent, but I could tell when the parent, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this. Or, you know how this is going to look on me. I'm the city council member. I'm the president of my company. I'm the whatever. I'm the elder at the church. I just talked about emotion and time impacting negatively your kid's response to a challenging situation. We don't have time.
Yeah.
We just we want the truck to keep moving. We can't. We can't. I think that's another component that some parents need to ask themselves. Uh, we have two jobs because we need two jobs.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you doing with all the other time? Are you
Because because if this is in fact one of the most important character qualities we can instill in our kids, and I believe it is, and again, theologians and philosophers would agree with that for thousands of years. The answer to that question is we have to figure out how to make time. That's the answer to the question. You have, because you're not going. That's your point. You're not going to be able to teach resiliency and grit and courage without taking some time, especially when they failed, and helping them walk through it. And again, I take that back to how we lead ourselves now. That we live in a world that's so fast, and we have so little margin in our life that when we're going through a difficult time, or when we've had an emotion and we've blown up and we've handled it in the wrong way, or we failed in some way, we don't take time so often, even in leading ourselves, to walk ourselves through that and go, okay, why did I get so angry about that? What's going on? What's really underneath the surface here? Okay, how do I lead myself out of this, as you keep saying? That takes some time. And I think you're right. I think we're in danger of being in a society and a culture right now where parents don't have time to do that, and nor do we take time to do that with ourselves. So great point. But my response is, you better make time. You better make time, or you're going to end up with kids who lack resiliency, or in our own lives, we'll be lacking resiliency because we won't lead ourselves through it. Anything else? Man, Tim, this has been so good, by the way.
I'll say one more thing. And I say this, I'm not the richest person in the world, but I'm pretty affluent. I mean, I have a really nice life for my kids and for me and my family. Affluency sometimes can be a disease when it comes to building this into your children. It really can, because you can afford vacations and new cars and big houses and swimming pools and all of these things. You can afford all these things. And it's fun to have a pool in your backyard for your kids to be able to play. It's fun to be able to give them a car, a Range Rover when they're 16. Those are fun things. You indirectly are doing things to your child, I think, that make things really easy for them. And you're asking them to search for some hard things in life that would maybe develop some of this resiliency, you're building a bubble around them that makes it really, really hard to find any hard things. Everybody wants to run towards comfort.
So I'm going to rephrase what you just said. Tell me if I'm incorrect. Affluency works against resiliency
Unless you're intentional.
unless you're intentional. Now, I want to pause for our audience, because some of them may be going, well, I'm not that affluent. Maybe there's some that aren't, but just because you live in this country, you most likely are one of the most affluent people that have ever lived on this planet.
True.
Most likely you are in the top 1% of people that have ever walked foot on this planet, just simply because you live in this country. So that's important for us to catch that. Affluency, how did you say it? Because I said affluency will work against resiliency, and you said unless
you're intentional. Let me give you a quick example. Like I said, I worked at an affluent school where kids, on their 16th birthday were driving these gorgeous cars around, and for a weekend they would go to Hawaii or whatever. I'm not saying that you don't hear me, that don't ever do those things.
Yeah,
What I'm
yeah.
saying is there are things that you can intentionally do that will help your child build in resiliency, even though they have this really blessed life. I'll give you an example. There was a young man that I mentored through high school. He's now a sophomore in college. His parents retired at the age of 45, never to work again, meaning they had all the money that they needed to live the lifestyle that they wanted, and they had a gorgeous house and all those things. They made their son do two things that I thought was brilliant. Number one, they made him have a job.
Hmm.
Did he need to have a job? No. He wanted to go on a mission trip, $2,000 to do that. So the parents just writing a check?
They said go earn it.
Yeah, go earn it.
Hmm.
A little thing like that goes
yeah.
a long way.
Yeah.
The other thing they made him do is pay his cell phone bill. And you might think, well, why would you do that? You could easily pay it. Yeah, you could. But there's some little life lessons that they decided to teach, and they did a few other things like that. They needed to make sure that their son was grounded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that he was developing some grit.
Yeah.
And as I would work with him, and he made a ton of mistakes. He was messing up all the time. He never once came into my office and looked for a way of getting out or had an excuse. He owned it every single time.
Big part of life. Big part of life. Yeah. You have any idea where he is now? Please don't tell me he's in prison because that
No,
ruins
no,
the whole
he's in
story.
college. He's a sophomore in
Yeah,
college.
yeah,
He's doing
yeah,
great.
yeah.
And guess what? He's still making a few
But
mistakes. I still hear from
yeah,
his parents,
yeah,
right? But every time I talk to him, hey, I heard things didn't go so well. Yeah, I messed up again, Mr. Welch.
yeah.
You
But he's
know?
owning it, and he's then figuring out what to do with it. Man, you're right. You know, one of the things that happened with our kids, and I don't think I did this intentionally based on what you're talking about. More of it was, well, I'll tell the story and I'll explain why. So it was just briefly, we decided when our kids were young, we were going to spend money on experiences more than things. We wanted to do that. So we as much as we possibly could, we would travel with them and do things like that. So we were on one trip, and the kids were, and it was a trip that a lot of people would never get a chance to take, and they were acting like spoiled little brats, and it ticked me off. And that's part of the reason I did this. I didn't necessarily do it for right motives. Going, we're going to teach them grit, uh, but I did tell them, I'm like, you know what, we're never doing a trip like this again without you guys earning your way. And after that, when we did family trips, they had to get side jobs and earn part of it. They didn't have to earn, they couldn't have earned the whole thing, but every trip we went on that as a family after that, they had part ownership in it. They had some sweat equity in it, if you will. And I look back on them like, oh, thank God, because that was a way that they were learning grit. They were learning tenacity. So in an affluent culture, in an affluent home, or in which most of ours are, simply because we live here, be very intentional to find ways then that you can develop that in your children.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you what my parents did. When I went to college, my parents paid for my college, and I appreciated that. They wanted to make sure when I graduated, I didn't have any debt. And we did that for our four children. But anything you wanted to do, you wanted to go out for the weekend, you wanted to go with some friends on a road trip, you wanted to, go out to a restaurant, you wanted to date a girl, that was on you. All the extra cash, I'm going to pay for the essentials, you're going to pay for the rest. And it's exactly what you just said. They could, I couldn't pay for all of that. They helped me, but they made me accountable
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to be responsible. It was no different than who takes care of their car better, the kid who just received a brand new free car that's $50,000, or the kid that had to earn, and buy a $20,000 car. Who's gonna take care of that car better? We all know the answer to that question.
Mhm.
Those same principles that we would admit are obvious, we should as parents be instilling in the
Yeah.
way that we raise our
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And by the way, you affluency or not affluency, if you aren't intentional,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're gonna miss some great opportunities for 18 years of teaching your kids resiliency. Because after they graduate,
Yeah.
move on to the world, your influence is diminished a little bit.
Yeah. Very much so. Tim, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Critical, important conversation, both in how we lead our children toward this important thing called resiliency and how we lead ourselves toward it. So, very, very important conversation. I have no doubt that everyone listening, including myself sitting here, we learned some things, or probably some things that we're going, ooh, I got to work on a few things. So hopefully, some parents going like, ooh, I got to change some things. I want to do some things a little bit differently. It's never too late. Remember, it's never too late for any of us. Well, we're at one of my favorite parts of our podcast, Two Truths and a Lie. You've been a guest here before, and I hate to admit it, you stumped me before. You got me last time. So I get a second chance here. Give us two truths, two truths and a lie, and I got to guess which one is the lie.
Okay, so here they are. I didn't actually put as much effort into this one, but we'll see if I still can stump you. I would say that my greatest achievement as a coach was that I was able to coach two of my sons to individual state championships, wrestling championships. A second thing, I would say that as a coach, my last 4 years of coaching, I won consecutive Conference of the Year coach 4 years in a row, right before I retired. And the last one is I will be leading my 28th short-term mission trip this summer with high school kids.
Okay. Last one's got to be true. That one's true. Am I right?
Yes. It's
Okay,
true.
good. I'm
It
down to
is my
50 good chance.
28th
I knew
trip.
because the very first conversation I ever had with you was about missions trips and how impactful those can be and how it changes the lens of people forever, and why I wish every single person could go visit a third world country at some point in their life. So I figured that one was true. So I got a 50-50 chance now. I'm going to say the first one is also true, that you coached 2 sons to state championships.
I did not.
Oh, I'm 0-2 with you.
You know, my kids tease me all the time that I'm the father that creates runner-ups.
Yeah.
So I had 2 sons actually make the finals, but lost in the finals in wrestling.
Yeah.
And I had one son that was also second place at the state golf championships.
Yeah.
So they tease me like, Dad can only produce runner-ups.
Well, second place develops grit like nothing else. They've said that third place on the podium, first place, of course, is glad because it's first place. Third place feels a little bit like, wow, I barely made it onto this podium, right? Because they usually give medals to the first 3 places. Second place is just like, I'm first place loser.
Yeah.
Which isn't true, of course. We know that. But okay. All right, you got me. Again, I'm 0-2. Now I need to have you back. I'm competitive. I may have you back until I win one of these. All right. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Wow, that episode was packed with so many nuggets of truth. Regardless, if you are a parent or plan on being a parent in the future, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share with a friend who needs to hear this. We'll see you next Wednesday for another podcast drop. Have a great week.